Hello and welcome. I'm Fahd Husain. Let's start with the bigger picture. There's renewed talk of an Iran proposal, but the ceasefire remains fragile and groups like Freedom Force are still active. So this isn't stability, it's a pause and it can break quickly. Now, why does that matter for Pakistan? Because if tensions flare again, the Strait of Hormuz becomes the pressure point. Even a partial disruption there can hit global oil supply and push prices up fast. And Pakistan sits directly in the line of that shock. We rely heavily on imported fuel. We don't have large strategic reserves and mostly depend on commercial stocks. So we don't have much room to absorb a disruption. And you're already seeing the impact. Higher fuel prices feeding straight into inflation and cost of living. So the real question is simple. Can the government protect supply and prevent prices from crippling the economy? Or does the burden once again fall? So let's take a deeper look into where we stand in terms of our vulnerability to oil shocks. We've experienced an increase in price, supply is holding out. What more could go wrong and what more can go right? These are the big questions, and to answer them we are joined today by Federal Minister for Petroleum, Mr. Ali Parvez Malik. Welcome to our show. Of course, he's had a long career in politics and also you've also served in the Ministry of Finance, so I think you get a good 365 view of where we stand.
And before we start off with your interrogation, let me congratulate you on this new project. I wish you all the best, and I just pray that you're able to spotlight the real challenges that we've struggled with over the years, and we're able to make a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. So where we are today, of course, we've realized that we are so dependent on the oil from the Strait of Hormuz that one shock, and Pakistan is one of those many countries that are rattled with that. In terms of we've managed the supply well so far, and that's the main thing. So there's no panic. Fuel is available, much pricier but available. But of course, we are very vulnerable. Something bigger happens. It discontinues for a longer period of time, and we could go into all kinds of shocks. So when you are looking at how to ensure that our supply is guaranteed or is solid, where do we stand today?
There is no denying the fact that Pakistan is hugely dependent on imported energy in order to meet its requirements. And again, there is no surprise that we are hugely dependent on the GCC countries because of the simple reason of close proximity to that area. But one thing that I would like to emphasize, Fahd Sahab, here is that we need to revisit the entire paradigm now, because not only do we have to diversify our sources of supply, but more fundamentally, we also need to review how do you move towards greater indigenization and how do you view this entire thing from the lens of energy security, because Pakistan is to some extent blessed with the geology and the incidence of hydrocarbons. We might not be as fortunate in terms of having a local crude available, but there are a lot of gas reserves which can be converted to electrify and meet our energy requirements. So we have to revisit the entire regime. Then there are also challenges as to whether we need to build up buffers to cushion temporary turbulence, and then there are multiple other reforms that we are trying to do. But one thing that I would just close on is that what we have realized over the last 2 months is that no matter how enormous the challenge is, if we come together as a nation, if we come together as whole of the government, no challenge is insurmountable, because in just in days we've chartered out new supply lines, we've touched new sources of supply that we've never considered, and we've been able to handle this crisis, I think, in a reasonable manner, even if you compare us with countries which have strategic reserves and deeper pockets.
I want to come to that. When it comes to ensuring better supply, of course, one aspect is having more domestic supply available, and that's a
That's
long-term
the energy-
project and
absolutely.
exploration and all
Absolutely,
of those. The
absolutely.
other is the external one, and we are so dependent on the external side right now that we need to now figure out, okay, where do we go from here in terms of our dependency on oil. So in fact, since I've got the map here,
Ji.
if we can just come here for a
Sure.
second, try and, because I really want to understand what we are looking at, and I think the viewers will also understand. So currently, we are here, this is the Strait of Hormuz.
Absolutely.
And all of our LNG comes from here, mostly from Qatar.
The entire diesel supply comes through Kuwait because we've had a 50-year-long relationship with Kuwait Petroleum.
Okay.
And they have been supplying us whatever refined diesel we need. And then because of proximity to Karachi and Kemadi port, we have been getting most of our crude from Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia.
Right.
So when this water course was choked, we could not get the crude supply in, and hence we struggled to develop alternative supply chains.
Now the danger is, as of course, even if the war ends, Ali Saab, it's so, this can happen again.
Absolutely.
So we need to figure out what to do. So
Absolutely.
other than here, what are our options? I mean, I know Oman.
Oman is definitely one option.
Okay.
Then you also have a pipeline
This one.
connecting east coast with the west coast of Saudi Arabia.
Right.
And I'm extremely grateful to the Saudi government. I think they were extremely accommodating to Pakistan's requirements, and Pakistan was amongst the early countries which were allowed shipments out of Yanbu port. And that's been a huge source of support because about 70-80% of the diesel that is consumed in Pakistan is manufactured indigenously. That is, if you're able to run your refineries at high throughput, you will not be challenged to the same extent as you would be challenged in meeting your petrol requirements if you're able to run your refineries.
So we are using this now?
We are absolutely using Yanbu, and then UAE also has a port which is outside the Strait of Hormuz, which is Fujairah,
Okay.
which is the smaller of the ports. It's had a few security challenges, but we're also getting supplies from here. We are also getting supplies from Oman. We've also been able to diversify and get crude supplies in from the US. We are also getting crude supplies from West Africa, Nigeria, and many other countries.
And
What
the
we are
US will
trying-
probably come through this route. This is the shortest route, coming through Suez Canal all the way through
Absolutely.
the Red Sea.
And Libya is another area that we are trying to develop. Because one constraint that we have is, in the last many years, we've not really invested in our refining capacity. So most of the refineries that we have are simple hydro skimming facilities, which mean they're not able to process heavier crude, which comes from Kazakhstan, Russian states, and most of the other countries. So we have to focus and
they need to be upgraded.
Absolutely.
So just
absolutely.
quickly,
and
just
that's
to
a
wrap it
whole
up.
different project that we need to attend
So just to wrap it up, we are planning to diversify
Absolutely.
from here, which
Absolutely.
also means Russian option.
while
although
respecting whatever international obligations there are.
But if we are expanding these options, the freight would be much more. So this
Absolutely.
oil would become, so for example, oil from the US would become more expensive.
So there are various interventions that you can do to reduce the incidence of higher logistics. You can use larger vessels like the very large crude carriers, VLCCs, which unfortunately cannot come into our ports because they require a much deeper draft.
Right.
But they can come to Oman or any of the other larger ports, and from there we can do a ship-to-ship transfer and shift that product to smaller vessels, which can then bring it to Karachi, and that can economize on the cost. And the other difference is, most of the crude that you obtain from GCC is based on either Dubai benchmark or Omani benchmark. WTI and US crudes is generally benchmarked with WTI, which generally trades at a discount than Brent or Dubai.
So which is the shortest term option available? Let's assume the war ends in a couple of weeks. Is this the quickest option where we can increase output from here?
action is we go back to what we
Well,
were
yeah,
doing.
that's
But I think the real lesson is that you have to diversify your supplies and you have to buy a bit from UAE, you have to buy a bit from Oman, you have to respect and appreciate what Saudi Arabia did for you. They provided you all the accommodation that you needed. You have to diversify your dependence on Qatar. You have to look at how you can handle the Kuwait problem. So, you know,
So the
thinking in the short term, what you need to do is diversify your sources of imported supply for both crude and refined product, and in the medium term push the needle on indigenization. And I think that is what we were already working towards in the last 1 year.
But that's going to take a while.
No, but absolutely, because that requires a lot of investment. But Fatsab, the thing is, at least we've embarked in that direction. We've started walking in that direction. In the last 1 year, you would be pleased to know we've undertaken 3 bid rounds. We've attracted large companies like Turkish Petroleum, United Energy to come and do exploration activity in Pakistan. After a lull of 20 years, in fact, we are starting off with the first offshore drilling prospect, which is the Indus Block C. Turkish Petroleum has been granted all visa approvals, but obviously because of this war situation, they're
That will
holding
take a
back.
while.
But 3 vessels will come in. They will start drilling, and we expect
Okay.
you know.
So of course the supply issue is an important thing, and we hope that we're able to diversify. I think
And indigenize
both of them. The other issue is having enough reserves to deal with the shock, and we have commercial reserves. You said we have no strategic reserves, and then this huge hue and cry
I
after
don't know
that. And although I agree with you, I mean, it's no secret.
Absolutely.
People knew about that.
Absolutely.
But the fact that people know about it and the fact that we don't have them are two separate things, and we should have them. And you said that now we need them. So what's happening now?
But Fatsab, my submission is, despite those constraints, did we not attend to the challenge in a far better manner than, let's say, India? They have reserves, but did you not see what happened on their fuel stations? Did you not see what happened with their restaurants? They stopped hot meals in restaurants because of the LPG challenge. So we've not had any such instances, not even a single instance was reported.
Except when you're about to increase the price then. But that's only for one evening, and that's understandable.
Absolutely, and I don't know why we just can't accept that this is a dynamic situation and this will keep changing every now and then.
But we need strategic reserves.
Okay, but you must also understand what has been the constraint, you know, in restricting us to move in that direction. You will need serious amount of money to not only create that infrastructure, but then also to invest in that working capital. And it's not that, you know, we have not considered these options. During the government of President Pervez Musharraf, Mott MacDonald was engaged, and they did a complete study to build this ecosystem, but it was shelved because it needed more than $500 million to fund, and unfortunately we live on day-to-day basis.
So what is the status now?
So the thing is, we have re-engaged Mott MacDonald and similar consultants. We've constituted a key team to review all aspects of creating this ecosystem, the funding requirements. One, we have the basic framework in place. Once we have gotten all the stakeholders on board, we will commission a proper study and then hopefully try to thrash out a roadmap to move to that end point in a few years.
So,
but Fatsab, this is not the only option. There are other easier and more intelligent options available, which is and to give you, which is that we, operationalize the bonded warehouse scheme that we have. That is, we go to KPC, we go to Aramco's of the world and tell them that you also need to diversify your storage. Why don't you come and invest and build those storages in Pakistan? The government will provide you all the protections and all the assurances, and we will only touch this reserve if and when needed and under such conditions, which will enable you to have access to that storage and yet not be committed in terms of money to building that storage.
So bottom line being that we need reserves, whether they come through option A or option B.
Absolutely.
As long as we have 60, 30, 60, 90 days of reserves.
Or the other easier option is you increase the storage requirement for all these commercial operations and build that additional cost in their pricing structures and ensure that you have enough vigilance that they remain wet at all times. But so depending on what combination of these interventions
normally
you do.
Countries have strategic reserves, so our reluctance is primarily based on the cost factor that it's very expensive to build and maintain.
So let me throw a few numbers at you. If you decide that you want to stock up 1 month's of crude consumption, that means you at least need $500 million to invest in that inventory. And then on top of that, for every barrel of storage that you would need, as per the Mott MacDonald study done in 2005, you will need to invest at least $40 per barrel, which will be a one-time cost to build that structure.
Right.
Whether you do it underground, above ground, that's your discretion. So you combine those two things, implies that the number or the bill would be anywhere between $500 million to $1 billion. Do you think Pakistan has that kind of resources to do that project in one shot? I leave it to the imagination of your
partners like, for example, Saudi Arabia,
So that's
Azerbaijan.
what I suggested. That's where the bonded schemes come in. You encourage them to diversify their storage, and they have those storages all over the world. And after this stranglehold that you see in the Strait of Hormuz, maybe we could talk to KPC, because they were completely cut off with the rest of the world. To encourage them to build storages in Pakistan, we give them the safety, the protection and all the fiscal incentives. They keep the product here. The government, if and when required, can touch that resource, buy that from KPC under particular conditions, and then use it. Otherwise, they can supply it to the rest of the world.
In either case, we'll have to take a decision.
We are already working on that.
So decision has been made that we need
Absolutely, that you need to buttress your buffers, whether it be your exchange buffers, whether it be your oil buffers, whether it be your wheat buffers, whatever you do. Because as the Chinese curse goes, interesting times.
To say the least. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you need to prepare. One thing that you need to just accept is that the volatility, no matter when this issue settles, will remain high for the foreseeable future. So you need to plan accordingly.
So basically, now that we know what our weaknesses are, and of course we always knew them, but there's a certain urgency to addressing those weaknesses. What happens to currently we've talked about the crude, but the LNG coming from Qatar, primarily that's our supply. That's also now almost not there. What do we do about that?
Okay. But frankly speaking, despite this lack of supply from Qatar, we are still able to meet our energy requirements. Yes, we've had to restrict supply of gas to the domestic sector to the meal hours, but other than that, we're still providing gas to the fertilizer sector, because one crisis that has trumped the oil crisis is the fertilizer crisis. Currently, the international prices are over 15,000 rupees per bag. In Pakistan, they remain stable at 4,000 rupees, 4,500 rupees per bag, because we've continued to run our fertilizer plants. We continue to shoulder the burden of the power sector. We are still giving them 300, 400 MMCFD of gas. Yes, we will still need some gas as the demand for power goes up, but that is where we have to reorientate and sharpen our focus towards greater indigenization. And then the 10th anniversary of all the Qatar contracts is also coming up. We will also sit with our suppliers and see what mutually agreeable point we can arrive at, because their capacity, their production capacity has also been impaired.
What happens when we completely run out of gas? Do we have some figures in like when our own reservoirs are running out?
But absolutely, Fahd Saab, as I said, if you look at the geological potential of Pakistan, we don't have much oil, but there is a lot of gas indications in the tribal area, and I think that's the new SWI that we need to develop, provided we are able to sort out the security challenges and the fiscal challenges that are there. Once we liquidate the legacy baggage that we have in terms of the circular debt, once we are able to pay out and provide that liquidity to the E&P companies, and they start actively exploring that area, I think there is a lot of gas that is available which we can very quickly bring into the network and compensate for the depleting mature fields in Balochistan, in the south of the country.
Very quickly, just a couple of things. Since you've also served in the finance, so I'll ask you to put that finance hat also, because then
I always have my
you'll have to look at it
finance
from both sides. This issue of petroleum levy, now money for the government, there's been back and forth. It was there was a controversy. Why is there no consistency of policy in terms of what the government wants to do?
There is absolute consistency. What you need to, and the viewers need to understand, is the genesis of most of our financial and fiscal crises has been the runaway deficit that we've not been able to manage. So either you widen and deepen your taxation, or you reduce your expenditure to ensure that the fiscal deficit is sustainable. Otherwise, you will always take, you can throw me out, you will always take the easier route out, which is putting indirect taxation, which is regressive, onto the shoulders of the common man, and try to make both ends meet. So that's where it is, and I think that is the reason why the Prime Minister is religiously pushing the FBR to improve its enforcement capabilities, and that is what we need to focus on.
Until that happens, we have to live with the petroleum levy. That's
the harsh reality. That's the harsh reality. Or you do away with all the fat, you privatize and make sure that you quell all the hemorrhaging, because the deficit number is a culmination of what you're able to achieve at the revenue at the top level, or what you're able to shave from your expenditure.
We should have seen more results on that. That's my personal opinion. Much of this could have been done, both in terms of cutting the fat and increasing the revenue.
So if you look at the materiality of those interventions, the largest expense that you have today is debt servicing, which is not really in your control, and that is where you have to revisit the entire.
That you can't.
But you have to revisit the federal government and the provincial sharing formula, because you have to make the federal government more sustainable, fiscally sustainable. So the largest expense is defense, the largest expense is debt servicing, then the second largest expense is defense, then the third largest expenditure is pension. So these are all fixed expenditures. What you can primarily touch upon are 2 trillion rupees of costs, which is the cost of running the civilian government.
You have to have provinces on board, and that's a separate thing.
And the constitutional challenge.
That's a political challenge for a political government. Finally,
but there is no escaping that.
There is no, and it has to be done. Looking ahead now, what lessons have been learned from this shock of the war, and what are some of the key reforms that we should be seeing in the short term?
Okay. Simplistically speaking, I think there are 3 areas that we have to work towards if we want to make Pakistan a self-reliant and functional democracy and economy. You have to ensure that you have a reasonable resource envelope, which is the taxation reform and how you keep a handle on the fiscal situation, because that is your Achilles heels. That constrains you from building those reserves, that constrains you from investing in your manpower. And how you do that, that's a completely
But
different
specifically
science.
in terms of petroleum, specifically.
But petroleum is a subset of the economic challenges. Na ji? If I am not able to pay the E&P companies, how will I be able to tap into the potential that my geology offers? So petroleum is a subset of the economic challenge. You cannot attend to that in isolation. The second thing that you have to do is improve on the competitiveness index, and that is where your failing exports come in. That is where your enablement of the private sector comes in. That is where the enhancement and the improvement in the business environment comes in. And the third is, how do you attract private investment into all spheres, whether it be in the digitization agenda of the government in terms of the energy outlook or on the other matters.
How do you improve refineries?
They can. It's very simple. You have to get out of the way. You have to deregulate the sector. You can't start giving too much attention to people who in government, when they were there, did not do anything and now are shouting out to regulate those refineries.
So is that happening?
You have to attend to their genuine concerns. We have attended to most of the concerns. The only thing that is outstanding is that we have to, in this budget, sit down and ensure that all the input sales tax that they get charged, they are able to adjust against the output. And this intervention, in which the petroleum products were parked into the exempt category in the budget of 2024, is what has hindered this progress. But this needs to be done, because this is what will enable us to also export diesel and other petroleum products like what India was doing in this crisis. And once we do that, there is no stopping us.
Ali Parvez Malik Saab, thank you so much for joining. We will take, when we come back, much more. Do stay with us. In the last 24 hours, the diplomatic standoff in the Middle East has reached a critical pivot point. Iran has officially put a 14-point peace proposal on the table, delivered through Pakistani mediators. The core of the offer is a three-stage roadmap: regional ceasefire and a long-term freeze on its nuclear program in exchange for immediate lifting of the naval blockade. It is the first time in months we have seen a concrete document aimed at de-escalation, but the optimism is being met with a cold reality from Washington. President Trump's reaction has been swift and skeptical. While acknowledging that lines of communication remain open, the president has labeled the current proposal not acceptable, signaling that the US is holding out for much deeper concessions. He has doubled down on his stance that the pressure campaign will continue until a total deal is reached. This creates a dangerous gap. Tehran is looking for an exit ramp, while the White House is signaling that the price of peace has just gone up. The volatility on the water intensified almost the moment the US signaled its next move. Within hours of the White House announcing Project Freedom, what it called, the massive Freedom Force mission to escort merchant vessels, reports of active firing surfaced. Iran's Revolutionary Guard claimed to have fired on a US Navy frigate near Jask Island, asserting that the vessel was forced to turn back. While Washington has issued a flat denial stating that no American ships were struck, the UAE has confirmed a serious escalation. An oil tanker was targeted and hit by 2 Iranian drones while transiting the strait. As these accusations fly, the physical reality in the Gulf is changing rapidly. The Freedom Force, with its 15,000 personnel and over 100 aircraft, is now officially moving to guide ships through these contested waters. While the mission is framed as a humanitarian effort to rescue stranded vessels, it effectively puts a massive US military shield in Iran's backyard. With warships and Iranian fast boats now operating in the same narrow channels, the margin for error has never been thinner. We are looking at a region that is simultaneously talking peace and preparing for the next phase of war, and nothing more could be dangerous. So, let's do a deep dive on what this means. Now, let's do a deep dive into the current situation. As we know that the war is dragging on, there doesn't seem to be any major breakthrough, and events tend to pick up a momentum of their own. So, where are things going now? We are joined by a very important guest today. We'll have a conversation with him and try and get his perspective. Mr. Erwin van Veen is our guest. He is joining us from Brussels in Belgium. He is a senior research fellow at the Klingendale Institute, where he also heads the Middle East program. He has also earlier worked as a security and development advisor at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, is also the author of many books. Mr. Van Veen, thank you for joining us today.
It's a privilege. Thank you.
So you join us on a day when some developments are taking place. The Iranian news agency has said that Iranian vessels have fired on two US ships which were trying to sail into the Strait of Hormuz. The US CENTCOM has denied any such incident, but the Abu Dhabi, the UAE authorities are also saying that their ships have also been targeted by drones. So clearly a bit of a tension going on there. Is this, could this be the beginning of something very dangerous, or you feel that this is part of the attempt by both sides to try and find a better bargaining position?
Well, in my view, we never really left the danger zone after the Americans imposed a naval blockade, which went against the logic of the ceasefire that really sought to create more space for a negotiated solution. And the Iranians had even agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz just a couple of days before the blockade was installed. Some conditions, of course, to follow the navigational routes, plotted by Iran and with coordination with the Revolutionary Guard Corps. But nevertheless, it was progress. And this blockade, of course, raised the tensions, especially when it got more serious and when it got taken global by the US impounding several Iran-linked vessels. So what we see now is a variation on that theme, I think, where President Trump has just announced some vaguely worded scheme, basically, to get ships out of the Strait of Hormuz, presumably with US naval help. And Iran is basically signaling that that's not a good idea unless the Americans want a resumption of military activity.
The situation that, the way that I'm reading it, Mr. Van Veen, I'll just put across my perspective and I'd like you to respond to it. The way that I'm reading it is that whatever is coming out from Washington, D.C. doesn't seem to be very well thought out. And this is the latest instance of, what I'm talking about, this big announcement of the US Navy trying to help a ship stranded come out without any details, and it doesn't address the fundamental risk from the point of view of the ship's owners themselves, that all it takes is one little shot or one drone to completely demolish all ambience of safety. So why do you think the Americans are resorting to such vague kind of statements which really don't either promote their position or in any way communicate anything which would provide some sort of a safety to their allies?
Well, first of all, I think you're putting it very politely, but very correctly as well, in the sense that, it was clear that the Americans started this war without a plan, basically, other than the Israel-made assumption that the Iranian government would collapse after a substantial regime or government official decapitation, which is, we've seen the decapitation, but not the collapse. And this was predictable, I think, to many people with greater familiarity with Iran, including the CIA itself, which called this sort of Israeli fantasy farcical, if I recall it correctly. And to be totally honest with you, I think the US has never left that spirit or attitude or approach that the Iranian nuclear issue can be resolved by the application of coercion. So first military and now economic. And we don't seem to be seeing a lot of strategic thinking from Washington, which basically, underlines two things. One is that they are not yet at the point are willing to admit to themselves that, they basically embarked on a fairly reckless adventure without a plan B, essentially. And it also means, for us and the rest of the world, that the cost of this conflict will keep mounting, in particular through oil and gas prices.
The diplomacy is still going on, Mr. Van Veen, and I'm sitting at the place where most of the diplomatic activity is underway quietly. It hasn't made any headlines, but we do know that there's a lot of back and forth going from here, in Islamabad to Tehran, and then of course to Washington also. And we all hope that at the end of the day something does come out of it. Well, one thing that has come out of it is a new proposal that we've heard about, which was given by the Iranians to Pakistan, and Pakistan then sent it across to Washington. And President Trump has been pretty dismissive about this proposal, even though what we read about it, obviously it has not been made public, but what is being reported by credible news organizations, it does show that the Iranians are trying to be a little bit more flexible. But on the other hand, the Americans seem to be very dismissive of the whole idea of negotiation, even though it is very much clear to everybody, except perhaps President Trump, that they don't have too much leverage over Iran anymore.
Yes. No, again, I think that's a good way of putting it. We should, it goes back to my earlier point that I think the Americans have not yet managed to admit to themselves that they made a mistake and that they will have to pay a price for having made that mistake in the form of some concessions towards Iran. And that is very painful, of course, for President Trump, because he has always been the person who said he could do better, right? Better than President Obama, better than the nuclear deal of 2015, which incidentally resolved the problem that we are facing today, or that the Americans are trying to address by military force together with Israel. At least it would have put the Iranian nuclear program, the civilian program, and their architecture on hold for 15 years. So I think that the difficulty that we face today is how to reconcile different objectives. And this is also the challenge that the chief of the Pakistani army and his helpers will need to, try to bridge or mediate. So far doing a great job, but success will be difficult to achieve, I think, as long as the Americans insist on their maximalist position and then throw in something like the naval blockade. So, like you say, Iran has shown a little bit of flexibility, but it stays close to its, core interest as it has always done. But from the American side, I don't think we've seen any flexibility so far.
Well, I mean, yes, you're right. There isn't much flexibility. Perhaps there is some behind the scenes. We don't know. Perhaps the Americans are a little bit more reasonable in the back channel conversation that is going on. But if they were so, that would reflect some way or the other in the kind of diplomacy that is going on. Of course, knowing President Trump's nature, he might suddenly make a U-turn and say that, there's very good news and he's agreed to something. But whatever he has to agree to, Mr. Van Veen, of course, we do know that he has become a prisoner of his own rhetoric. we'll probably have to pay some kind of a political price for this, and perhaps he's not ready for that. So what I'm wondering is that if that be the case and he doesn't have too much time, then practically speaking he has only two options: either to somehow walk back from his rhetoric and try and meet Iran halfway, or escalate. But is escalation actually an option, realistic option, or it's not?
Well, it is certainly a realistic option in the sense of feasible, given the amount of US forces that continue to be deployed in the Sea of Oman, the Arabian Sea, and the Persian Gulf. The question is whether to achieve an outcome that is materially different from when the ceasefire began on the 8th of April. So the way I can see it, there are basically three options for the US if it comes to military action. One is a limited strike, one is a more extended period of strikes, and the third is some sort of amphibious operation or maybe a ground offensive into Iran or the coast of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the first two are feasible, but that's basically doing more of the same and expecting a different result. The third is very high risk, not just to US naval and military assets, but also because Iran is guaranteed to reciprocate. And it could try to take out the Yanbu pipeline, for example, that crosses Saudi Arabia. It could work with the Houthi to close the Strait of the Bab el-Mandab, basically. And in the worst case, if it's really put to too much pressure, then it could destroy a lot of the Gulf energy infrastructure, right, on the southern littoral of the Persian Gulf. The results of all of that would be quite catastrophic for the global energy and economic situation. And I'm sure the Americans are aware of this and in fact pointed to it by their allies and their friends across the globe who are basically paying the bill of this conflict to a large extent at the moment.
So then, in other words, this escalation option is not really an option because the cost of that is so high for everybody concerned that it naturally becomes a non-option.
Well, yes and no. I mean, I would agree with you from a strategic, rational point of view, but this is not the decision-making style that we've seen so far from the White House. I mean, the whole start of this conflict was not based on solid strategic, rational analysis, with even the CIA being put aside, right, as a credible source of intelligence on Iran. So, I guess we should not underestimate the psychological factor that somebody like President Trump is basically surrounded by yes men and has difficulty to deal with setback that affects his personal pride, maybe his statements that he's made in public on how well he was able to deal with Iran or would be able to deal with Iran and so on.
Finally, I just want to get your opinion on the sense that you're getting from where you're sitting in Europe, in the European Union. We recently had a very big event here in Islamabad also with the European Union, and there's a very big delegation here. So obviously relations between Pakistan and the EU are really improving dramatically in the last year and a half or so, that I've also noticed. But looking from your vantage point, what is the sense that you get of what senior EU officials are thinking about where all the situation is going, and do they have any say at all?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say two things probably. One is that, the fundamental problem for Europe, of course, or the EU in particular, is that it's, it has a backseat on this conflict with very few levers that it can actually use to influence the outcome. So that's a bit the result of the geopolitical neglect of the Middle East and of the EU policy towards Iran after the Americans withdrew from the nuclear deal in particular. So today, basically, they're event takers, right? They have to deal with whatever comes their way, in particular, higher energy prices. So what it will do is it will hopefully accelerate the European drive for more strategic autonomy. right? So that means becoming less dependent on the US, having alternative energy sources, increasing its military weight, these kind of things. And part of that, I think, could lead to new partnerships. That I think that remains to be seen. The second effect, namely, is the fact that this conflict has a global effect of making a lot of countries think about the security reliability, but also the diplomatic reliability of the United States and the vulnerabilities that exist under the current government. So that they will reconsider some of their strategic choices, and that may lead to new and maybe unexpected partnerships and alliances.
Well, absolutely, and I think a lot of things will change once the war ends in all parts of the world, including ours. And obviously, Mr. Van Veen, you've been following closely how Pakistan has been trying its very best to try and find some sort of a way out, but the situation has become so difficult because of the position taken by Washington that it's I can sense a certain level of frustration here also. When we think that things are moving in the right direction, some statement or some Truth Social post comes and it just completely spoils the atmosphere. So, of course, it is also a very big challenge for Pakistan to somehow see this whole process through and hopefully find a way, help find a way out for all the parties concerned. We are very grateful for you taking out time and joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
We will take a short break here. There's much more to come, so do stay with us. Pakistan today finds itself once again exposed to a crisis that neither created nor can control. The current conflict in the Middle East, the threat to regional stability and concerns over disruption in vital shipping routes have once again reminded us of a harsh reality. Pakistan remains dangerously dependent on imported energy. And whenever the world shakes, it is the Pakistani citizen who is left to absorb the aftershocks. This is not a new problem. And this is certainly not the failure of one government alone. This is the result of decades of policy making, where successive governments, regardless of political party or ideology, have failed to build a serious roadmap towards energy independence. For years, Pakistan is known that global energy markets are volatile. We have lived through oil shocks, supply disruptions, geopolitical conflicts, and repeated warnings from economists and energy experts. And yet, our response has largely remained reactive rather than strategic. Instead of building long-term resilience, governments have focused on short-term fixes. Instead of aggressively investing in domestic energy diversification, modernizing infrastructure, expanding renewables, upgrading transmission systems, and reducing dependence on imported fuel, we have often relied on stopgap measures designed to survive the next few months or the next political cycle. The consequences of this short-sightedness are now painfully clear. When tensions rise in the Gulf, when oil prices spike, when shipping routes face disruption, Pakistan immediately feels the pressure. Fuel prices rise, electricity generation costs increase, transport becomes more expensive, food prices climb because logistics costs increase, inflation deepens. And who carries the burden? Not the policymakers who failed to prepare, not the decision makers who had years to act. It is carried by the ordinary Pakistani, the salaried worker, the daily wage laborer, the shopkeeper, the family already struggling to make ends meet. Every global crisis becomes a domestic economic punishment for citizens who had no role in creating that vulnerability. What makes this even more frustrating is that Pakistan is not without options. We have enormous untapped solar potential. We have wind corridors that could have been scaled far more aggressively. We have hydroelectric opportunities. We have the capacity to create a diversified energy mix that reduces dependence on imported oil and gas. But these opportunities have too often been slowed by bureaucratic inefficiency, inconsistent policy, regulatory uncertainty, political instability, and the absence of continuity from one government to the next. Every administration tends to announce ambitious plans. Few sustain them long enough to transform the system. And energy independence cannot be achieved through announcements. It requires continuity. It requires difficult structural reforms. It requires governments willing to think beyond electoral cycles. The real question today is not simply whether Pakistan can manage this immediate crisis. The real question is, why are we still vulnerable? Why, after decades of repeated global shocks, are we still operating in emergency mode every time international markets fluctuate? Why has energy security remained a talking point rather than a national mission? And most importantly, how much longer will citizens continue paying the price for policy failures that span generations of leadership? This moment should serve as a wake-up call, not for temporary subsidies, not for short-lived relief packages, not for press conferences designed to calm headlines, but for a serious, bipartisan national commitment to energy independence. Because until Pakistan breaks this cycle of dependence, every international conflict, every regional disruption, every spike in oil prices will continue to land where it always does, on the shoulders of the Pakistani people.